No Minister of Finance ever gets to a point where they will just willy-nilly raise taxes without getting to a point where they may believe that they have no other alternatives. And I have never met a person who wants to pay more taxes in our country and I guess in the world. So nobody wants to pay more taxes. But this moment also presents us with an issue frontally that we need to confront.
In February 2025, South Africa found itself at a critical economic juncture, grappling with significant fiscal challenges that prompted the government to propose a 2% increase in the value-added tax, raising it from 15% to 17%. This proposal ignited widespread debate among policymakers, economists, and citizens, reflecting deep-seated concerns about the nation's financial health and governance. The government's rationale for the VAT hike centered on addressing a substantial budget deficit and escalating public debt. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana emphasized the necessity of increasing revenue to fulfill constitutional obligations and sustain essential public services. Treasury estimates suggested that the proposed VAT increase, along with other tax adjustments, could generate an additional 58 billion rand, approximately $3.1 billion for the 2025-2026 financial year. This infusion of funds was deemed crucial for maintaining social grants, healthcare, education, and infrastructure development. However, critics argue that increasing VAT is a regressive tax measure that disproportionately impacts lower-income citizens. South Africa's VAT system does exempt essential food items such as maize meal, brown bread, rice, and vegetables, but many other necessities remain taxable. This means that while the tax might bring in much-needed revenue, it could also make life more expensive for millions of struggling South Africans. The proposal faced immediate resistance within the coalition government and from the public. The Democratic Alliance, a key coalition partner, opposed the increase, arguing that it would disproportionately impact low-income households already burdened by economic hardships. DA leader John Steenhuisen articulated concerns that the VAT hike could exacerbate poverty and inequality, stating that the government should explore alternative revenue streams and curtail unnecessary expenditures before resorting to taxing citizens further. Public sentiment mirrored these apprehensions. Many South Africans, particularly those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, expressed fears that the increased VAT would lead to higher prices on essential goods and services, further straining their limited resources. The Pieter Maritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group highlighted that the VAT hike would affect the cost of everyday items, including food, toiletries, and electricity, thereby intensifying the financial pressure on households. Economists offered varied perspectives on the potential impact of the VAT increase. Some argued that, while the tax hike could provide a short-term revenue boost, it might also lead to reduced consumer spending, slowing economic growth. Others contended that without the additional revenue, South Africa risked further credit rating downgrades, which could increase borrowing costs and deter investment. South African Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago cautioned that the VAT hike could disrupt the nation's decreasing inflation trend, posing a critical risk to economic stability. He emphasized that such a move would be a self-inflicted shock, necessitating central bank action to counteract inflationary effects if implemented. Furthermore, international investors are closely watching South Africa's fiscal decisions. A VAT increase could signal to investors that the government is taking steps to stabilize the economy, but if not accompanied by effective expenditure management, it could deepen existing distrust in South Africa's fiscal management. Underlying the debate over the VAT increase is a pervasive concern about corruption and the mismanagement of public funds. South Africa has grappled with numerous high-profile corruption scandals that have eroded public trust in government institutions. Assets worth 14.18 billion rand have been frozen in corruption and state capture cases involving former ministers and major corporations such as McKinsey and ABB. These figures underscore systemic issues in financial governance and have fueled public skepticism regarding the effective utilization of any additional tax revenue. Mismanagement of funds has also been a recurring problem. Several government projects have exceeded their budget significantly, often without tangible outcomes. The recent 50 billion rand spent on emergency energy procurement, which failed to alleviate the the ongoing electricity crisis has raised concerns about whether increased VAT revenues will be used effectively or merely lost to inefficiency and corruption. Critics of the VAT increase have proposed alternative measures to address the fiscal shortfall. Suggestions include reducing state expenditure by eliminating redundant government programs, cutting excessive public sector wages, and intensifying efforts to combat corruption to recover misappropriated funds. Additionally, economic analysts suggest a focus on increasing tax compliance. South Africa's tax collection agency, SARS, has reported large-scale tax evasion, particularly among high-net-worth individuals and large corporations. Strengthening tax enforcement could generate significant revenue without increasing tax rates for ordinary citizens. Other potential solutions include implementing a wealth tax on high-income earners and introducing stricter controls on state-owned enterprises, many of which have been financial drainages due to poor management and corruption. With the VAT proposal stirring controversy, the upcoming budget speech by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is expected to address key concerns and outline alternative strategies to stabilize the economy. Some likely topics include revised VAT adjustments. The government may consider a phased VAT increase or targeted tax relief for low-income households to mitigate the impact. Taxation of high earners. To balance revenue generation, the budget might introduce higher income tax brackets or a one-time wealth tax. Public sector wage bill cuts. The budget could detail specific reductions in government salaries and hiring freezes to control spending. Incentives for economic growth. Expect announcements on tax incentives for small businesses and foreign investors to stimulate job creation and growth. There might be a renewed emphasis on prosecuting corruption and recovering stolen funds. The government could announce restructuring plans for state-owned enterprises, particularly Eskom and Transnet, to improve efficiency and reduce state dependency. Given the ongoing electricity crisis, further investments in alternative energy solutions and private sector involvement may be highlighted. With rising poverty levels, adjustments to social grants, including an increase in the basic income grant, might be proposed. The discourse surrounding the proposed VAT increase in South Africa encapsulates a broader conversation about economic management, social equity, and governance. While the government faces legitimate challenges in balancing the budget and fulfilling its obligations, the solution must carefully weigh the immediate need for revenue against the potential long-term socio-economic consequences. Addressing systemic issues such as corruption and inefficient spending is imperative to restore public trust and ensure that any fiscal policies enacted serve the best interests of all South Africans.
At the center of the disagreement that led to the budget speech being postponed is a 2 percentage point VAT increase and how government priorities would be funded. The move would have pushed the value-added tax to 17%. The budget documents compiled by the National Treasury stated that the tax policy proposals were designed to raise 58 billion rand in additional revenue for the 2025-26 financial year, with the largest increase being from the proposed VAT increase. There was a planned above-inflation increase in excise duties on alcohol and tobacco products. And the bottom two personal income tax brackets were going to be adjusted fully to compensate for the effects of inflation, while the remaining brackets would be partially adjusted. But all this was not to be, as National Assembly Speaker Tokodi Diza announced a last-minute decision to postpone the budget speech to allow for more engagement in Cabinet.
While today we've been gathered here to actually have the Minister of Finance presenting the budget to this august House, that there has not been agreement in terms of parties in the executive to actually find one another in proposals of the budget. And the executive therefore decided, as some of you already know, and as your whips have said in our discussion, some things that have already been on the media about where there are possible increases and where different parties, as well as members of the communities, perspective on those proposed increases were saying. And Cabinet therefore decided not to come and do a presentation of the budget.
Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says decisions need to be taken on how government priorities will be funded.
You can't have the 2% alone without talking about what's going to replace it, and that does not become contentious. What I'm trying to say, what we are grappling with, is not necessarily the 2% per se. What we are grappling with, given the challenges and priorities that we are facing, how do we fund them? Really, that's a debate. Do we borrow more? What are the implications of that? Do we continue cutting expenditure? What are the implications of that? Do we raise tax? What are the implications of that? There's general agreement that in the current environment, we need to find a way of funding our priorities. The debate is what is the best way of doing it?
Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen, a partner in the Government of National Unity, says the decision to postpone the budget speech was a responsible one.
A pro-growth budget doesn't hurt the poorest of the poor. A pro-growth budget doesn't increase the burden on the middle class. A pro-growth budget looks at those key elements that are required and reforms that are required to get the economy moving forward in a more bold way.
President Cyril Ramaphosa moved to assure the nation that the postponement of the budget speech was not a crisis.
We've been through a number of other near crises that threatened the existence of the Government of National Unity. This is not one of those that will threaten the existence of the Government of National Unity. It is a hiccup that we are going to get over. And we've already set a date for the presentation of the budget on the 12th of March.
According to the budget review compiled by the National Treasury, increasing spending pressures necessitated the tax increases to raise revenue amidst the low growth environment in an uncertain global landscape. The document says the postponed budget sought to prioritize infrastructure investment to boost economic growth, cushioning the poor from the high cost of living and stabilizing public finances. Gloria Sefako Mosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.